In this video, I'll go over how you can make your own sprite sheet generator in Python. What this will allow you to do is select a folder of images, like this folder I have here, where I have a bunch of these explosion images, and you'll be able to specify a width, a height, a number of rows and columns, and generate a sprite sheet, which is all those images plotted into a number of rows and columns. This is often used in games to improve load time for many things like animations and various sprites, because it's easier to load one image than many different images. So this is something that you often have to do, especially if you're using game engines like Unity or Unreal, and it's something that doesn't really have a specific workflow for. You could do this type of work in Photoshop or many other programs, but why not make our own software to do this, and we'll be able to add more features and eventually build upon this. But to make something like this, we're going to go over all those steps and really just create our own program that can generate sprite sheets from scratch. So to begin, I'm just going to close this. I'm going to delete that image, and we're going to start writing our sprite sheet generator. So to begin, you will need some packages and modules to make sure that you can kind of produce this program that we're going to make. And it's just going to be very kind of generic packages and modules that you'll need. So the only two things that we're really going to use that are maybe something you don't already have installed is the Pillow library for image manipulation, and also PySide6. You can also use PyQt as well. It's really up to you. I'm going to import OS. So that's going to give us ability to do things like list directories and use certain functions that will be able to pull lists of files in folders and things like that. So we'll have to import that module. And then we're also going to import from Pillow library, we'll import the image module as well. So we can create images and copy our smaller images that we load into a larger image ordered in rows and columns. So that's the first thing we do. The next thing we do is we need a path to specify the image directory that we're pulling these images from. So first we're just going to make a variable called image dir or image directory, and that will just equal the location pretty much where this program is ran from. And maybe in this case, since I have a folder called images with the images, I'll make it that folder. So I'll just make it images like that. Next, what we're going to do is specify another variable called image files. This will contain a list of the files in that folder or that directory. So we'll make this use a os command list directory and specify this as being the directory that we're going to get a list of the files from. So image dir, and then we're going to do image files equals, and actually, you know, you don't even need to do equals. We can just do image files dot sort, and that will sort that list in order because our images are numbered to specify what images come first before the other ones. Now these are all identical, so it doesn't really matter, but in most cases, if this is an animation of an explosion or something, these images would all be different, but just for testing purposes, they're just the same image duplicated here. So it's not going to matter, but we still should think about it in this case for using it properly. The next thing we need to do is create a list of images that we're going to be able to store the images that we want to export. So I'll make one more variable called image lst for image list, and just make that equal an array, a number of different items. So after that, we'll need to make a variable to specify a number of rows and columns. So we'll do n rows equals maybe 5 as an example for now. Number of columns equals 5 as well. And then we'll have to specify a variable for our export width of our image. So we'll do out width equals 1024, out height equals 1024. And then what we're going to do is loop through all our files and then add them to our image list for the images that we want to export in these rows and columns. So we're going to do for file in image files, that list the files in that directory, and we're going to create a variable called image, make it equal a image.open, so it's going to open the image, and we will take that directory and the file name. So we'll open the image, and then append that image to our image list. So there we go. We're adding it to this list. So after that, we've looped through all files, added them to our list of images that we want to export. The next thing that we're going to do is specify the max width and height. So if all those images are the same size and we do 5 rows and 5 columns, what's that width of that image times 5 for width and times 5 for height? We have to specify the maximum size of this image before we downscale it. So what we're going to do is max width equals number of columns times image list, and then we'll just take the first item from it because we're going to assume that they're all going to be the same size, because they should be if you're making a sprite sheet. And then max height will be number of rows times image list, and then 0 dot height. So there we go. And then what we want to do is create a new image with those dimensions. So we're going to do image output image.new, make it RGB so it has color, and max width, max height, and that's it. And then finally we're going to loop through all our images. So for I, image in enumerate image list, we're going to go through our list, and we are going to take the columns and make it equal I modulus number of columns, and then rows will be row equals I, and then number of rows, and then X equals column times image width, and Y equals row times image height. And then finally, we will take our image output, paste our images into that final file based on the rows and column, kind of in order from top, bottom, left to right, and top to bottom. So this is all going to be good. It's going to paste our images into these X and Y locations, which is our column times image width and row times image height, and that's going to be our number here, I, whatever we're enumerating through in order of that list, modulus columns, and then also for our rows as well. So that's going to give us our proper kind of ordering and placement of our images in our kind of list into that box of width and height of our image. So you'll notice here that I use 2 slashes or divide signs, if you want to say. Why aren't I just using 1? So this is pretty much a integer division operator, and you can also call it like floor division, but pretty much this will just divide the first argument here by the second and round the result down. So it's not going to allow for any decimals or fractions. It's just going to give us a solid whole number. So that's pretty much it. It's the same thing as if we use like a floor function from the math library. So that's the only reason why I'm using that, so we don't get decimal places and end up breaking things. So now that we've done this, we're pretty much almost done. The only final thing that we want to do is we probably don't want to image it super wide and super tall, so we want to do some final resizing. So we'll take our image output, we'll resize it, and we're going to resize it to our desired out width and our desired out height, and then save that as whatever we want to call it. So sprite sheet.png would be a good name to save it to. And I think that's all we really need to do. Now, of course, I don't think we've forgotten anything, but this looks like it should work. So we're going to test this out. And if this works and everything's good, then we're going to start creating a bit of a UI for it, because it would really not be great to have to go in here every time and change these variables manually and rerun the code. That's not ideal. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to go here and I'm going to run it. I'm going to look in this folder here to see if it actually outputs something. So if we run that, right now we don't have any spritesheet.png in here, but if we go and run this, so spritesheet.py, okay, it did something. There's our sprite sheet. Looks good to me, looks like it worked. So that's all great. That took our images here, put them all into a 5 rows, 5 column configuration. So that pretty much gives us our sprite sheet generator. Now to take this to the next level and to make it a little bit more usable and user-friendly, we're going to add a UI using PySide6. So that's the next thing we're going to take a look at. So to add a bit of a UI to this, we're going to have to refactor a lot of this code, like kind of change where it's placed into and start adding functions and things. So maybe for now, what I'm going to end up doing is just, I'll leave this here, but I'll kind of nudge it down and then start changing the code and adding it back in. So we're going to add some additional modules to import up here. We're going to import system. This will be important for creating like a window. And then we're also going to import our PySide6. So from PySide6, we're going to import Qt widgets, Qt GUI, and Qt core. And again, if you want to use PyQt, it's the same thing pretty much. And then we're going to define our application. So application equals Qt widgets, Q application. There we go. System.argv. Okay. And then we're going to create our class. So I'm just going to call it class Sprite Sheet Generator or Gen Qt widgets.q widget. And then our initialization class. Whoops, I need to do that. There we go. Let's do self. And that's all good. And then super dot init. There we go. Okay. So we're going to start off with creating our layout of the program. So we're going to do a variable called layout. Make that qtwidgets.qv vertical box layout. And then self.set layout. There we go. And next we're going to create an instance of this program. So that's pretty much our initialization class. We'll have to add a lot more to it, but let's just get a window popping up so we can actually have something that kind of works and is functional. So I'll create an instance of this. I'll do widget equals sprite sheet gen. So make an instance of our class here and then show that and then complete our loop here. So there we go. That's it. And I'm going to take all this other code that we had. I'm just going to remove it for now. I'm going to copy it. But let's just run this and see if we got something that works here. So what do we got? We got an empty window. There we go. That's our application right now. It's very just minimal, basic, doesn't have anything in it. So we have to start adding buttons and start adding our functionality to this window. So to do that, let's start building upon this. We're going to go in here to our initialization, and we have to start adding in all those variables and things. So I'm just going to paste that code back that I deleted, and we see we have a number of variables. We have the image directory, we have our image files, we sort our files, we have our image list, our rows, columns, output width, output height, all that stuff. We're going to take it. So I'm going to copy all that. I'm going to paste it in here just to save us a bit of time. Don't have to retype it. And what we're going to do is just add to each one of these self dot. So it's part of this initialization here. And there we go. So you can just reference to all these variables by typing self and then be able to access them. So we have all this added now. So now I'll just copy the rest of the code that we had from before, just for if I need a reference back to it. And now we have all these variables defined. Great. So that's really it. Now the next thing we have to do is start getting our functions wrapped up in this class as well. So we're going to have to make some functions. So we're going to make a export function. So down here, I'm just going to do def for a function, export, and paste our code for exporting. So if I go back to that other code that we wrote, where are we doing our exporting? Well, we go through the files, we add them to our list, we set the max width, max height, all that stuff, we resize. That's pretty much all the outputting or exporting code. So I'm going to take all that, and that's the rest of our program pretty much, and just throw it under here in our function for exporting. So that is pretty much it. And I'll make sure all this tabbing is correct so we don't run into issues here. There we go. So that looks good. So that's where we export our images, and that seems to all be okay. And now we have to start adding our UI, because right now if we save this, I don't know if it's going to run right now. I think it should, but let's give it a try. Nope. So image directory is not defined, because if we look at this, it's all referencing to these variables, but now they have to be appended with self dot to access them. So we can start adding that on. So might as well do that right now. So I'm just going to go in here and just do self dot image list. What else do we need to add that to? Image directory, image list, number of rows, number of columns, image list, number of rows, number of columns. I think that is almost everything. Out width, out height. I don't think I'm missing anything, but let's give that a try. Clear this output, run that again. What are we missing? Image directory is not defined on line 14. Oh, there we go. Forgot it here. Self.image directory. Okay. There we go. Let's give this a try. Great, we have our program, but there's no UI to actually export any of our sprite sheet or anything. So it's pretty much useless to have this function right now. So we need to add a way where we can click on a button, export stuff, get it all working. So let's do that. So what we're going to do now is we need a way for us to select a folder. We don't want to hard code in where we're pulling our images from. So that's one thing that we just don't want to do. We can have this as a default place that it looks for images for, but we should have a way of selecting a proper directory for images. So I'm going to add another function called select directory, and then just make that equal our directory pathing. So I could do something like, maybe something like path directory equals qt widgets dot q file dialog. So this will be a window that opens to get a directory and let us browse on our computer for where we want to point this program to. Directory, there we go. And we'll have to also, once we select that directory, it's going to use that path directory. So we'll have to sort it and do all the usual things. So we'll do like if path directory self.image directory. We'll set that image directory path up here to a different path. We'll set it to our path directory, the new path that we specify. And then of course we have to all over again get our image files from that directory. So like that, and then also sort. There we go. And that should be good. I'll save this. I'm going to run it just to make sure I have no issues. Okay, it runs. Now we need a UI. So how do we do a UI? We could create it in other softwares and things that make it really easy to create a UI, but I'm just going to do it through code because it's simple enough that we don't really have to worry about it too much. Like, it's not really hard to make a bunch of buttons and labels and stuff directly through code. So that's what I'm going to do just to keep things simple. So we're going to go in here after we define all our variables, before we specify our layout tier, and we're going to start adding our buttons. So the very first thing is we probably want a button to browse for where we want to select our images from. So I'm going to do something like self.button path equals qt widgets dot q push button, and we'll call this maybe like image path. And I'll use these single quotes since that's what I'm using most places here. And then self.button path, same thing. If you click on it, what happens? So we'll do if clicked. I think that should work. Clicked connect. Self dot and our function select directory, our function that we made here. So that should be good. And then what we're going to do is make a label. They'll specify how many images are in that directory. So we'll do something like a Q label, it'll just be like text. We'll call it label count. And if we're adding that label of how many images we have to tally up how much images we have when we specify that folder. So I'm going to go back in here into the select directory function and add that capability. So to do that, I'm pretty much going to have to go here after we sort our images. I'll do self.label count, set text, and then we'll set it to get the number of images we have. So length, self image files, we're going to get the length of that list that has all the files. That will be how many images we have. And then we'll say something like that, images found. And that will change the text to say like however long that list is. And then images found. So if the list is like 10 images, it'll say 10 images found. So now we're setting that text that we're going to add underneath the button. So that's all good. So what other things do we need? We got a browsing button to select a folder. It'll tell us how many images are in that folder. The next thing that we're going to maybe have to do is also have our button, or not button, but an input box for width of the image, like desired width, desired height, how many rows, how many columns. So I'll do self.label width. So I'll say like how wide should our image be in pixel size. So I'll make another label called export width. I'll just copy this. And then I'll do label height, export height. And in between this, we'll now have to do the boxes where you can enter text. So label width and then edit width. And I'll do Qt widgets again. This time use a Q line edit. So just like a line of text that we can edit. And then it'll equal like a string and then store it as our out width. And that's really it. And then we'll copy that and do the same thing for height. We'll just change it to edit height and out height. And that's pretty much it. Okay, so we got our text, export width, our box to input the width, height, box to input the height. Done with that. What's next? Now we need rows and columns. So exactly the same thing. Self label rows equals qt widgets.q label and give it a name. So rows. And then same thing for columns. That's really it. And change its name here. and then also a line edit as well. So self, but this time not edit with, it'll be edit rows, and it won't be self out with, it will be self dot number of rows, n rows. And same thing for columns. So edit calls, n calls. There we go. Now I got a row and column. And then finally, export buttons, self.btn export equals qt widgets dot q push button. There it is. And give it a name. So export sprite sheet. Just make all these the same. There we go. So that's going to be our button name. So we'll see that on the button. And then what happens if we click that button? Self.btn export.clicked connect the function to it, self.export. That is it. And we could probably, it don't matter. Let's just put self in there as well. Okay, so it's all good. And then finally, we got all these buttons created. We got all these boxes created to input text. But if we save this and we run it, hey, our program's still blank. And that is because we have to add these items to our actual layout. So that's the next thing we have to do. Even though we've created all of them, we have to add it to our layout here. So I'm going to go down to our layout here. After we define the layout as a vertical box layout, we're going to go in here and we're going to say layout dot add widget, and we're going to add all our widgets. So self dot, what's the first thing we have? BTN path. Done. I'll copy that to make it a bit easier. Go through all of them. So what do we got? Button path, label count. What's next? Label width. What's next? Edit width. Label height. Edit height. And label rows. Label columns. Edit rows. And edit columns. And finally our export button. So then we add our btn export. And then that's it. I don't think we have any more. So that's everything. So now we can finish up this layout. There we go. It's good enough. Take a quick look through our code. This is all good. All good, all good, all good. Just cruise through it. Make sure there's no issues or problems. And I think this all looks good. I don't see anything that is looking like a red flag or an issue. I think we're good to, actually this one here, it's not blue, so I see it's not referencing, so it's actually self.images or image files. That's one thing I forgot, but self.image files. Otherwise, everything else looks okay. So I'll save this all now. And we're going to run this. There we go. We got our rows, columns, width, height, image path. Does this actually work? So I'm going to go in here and delete that old sprite sheet. We got our images. Moment of truth. Let's see if this actually works. So here we go. Image path, select it. Images, select folder. 25 images found. Great. 1024 width. 1024 height. 5 rows, 5 columns. Export. There it is. So now we have our UI for our sprite sheet generator. And then the window title, this says Python. We can easily change that. If you want to really polish this up and make it have a different name, we can just go back to our initialization here, and at the end or at the beginning, I don't think it really matters where we put it. We could just do something like self set window title and set it to be like Sprite Sheet Exporter or Generator or whatever. Save that. Rerun this, and now the window title is changed, Sprite Sheet Exporter. So we have a simple UI for a very simple program, but now you don't have to generate sprite sheets by manually dragging things in Photoshop or using some action script or something. It's just your own program that you can add features to, and it didn't take us that long to make. It's not that much code, and it's fairly simple. And if you found this useful and you want to know how to make more programs and more things like this and start increasing the complexity, make sure you like this video, make sure you subscribe so I know that you're interested in this content, and I'll start to produce more. And also make sure you hit that bell button if you subscribe so you get notified when there's new videos. And if you enjoyed this and if you want to get more information about this, if you take a look in the description and you're part of the Patreon, you'll also get access to this PDF that goes over all these steps in a little bit more detail. And it could be a useful thing for reviewing these steps and just kind of coming back to things. If you forget how to do something, you don't have to rewatch the video. You just have this PDF as a good reference. So if you're part of the Patreon, also check that out.